Hey guys, welcome back. Well, we've solved the problems that we had with the fan, so now it's back to doing some actual astrophotography. Actually, the images I want to talk about today are taken just before I noticed the fan problem when I switched from the focal reducer back to the native focal length of my C925. These are three of the pictures I had taken with the focal reducer in place, and I'm using the Antlia dual band filter, the oxygen 3 hydrogen alpha dual band filter, and I wanted to share with you some of the thoughts and findings I have with this filter. I like the filter quite a bit. Let's get started. This is the imaging system I'm using for these photographs we'll be talking about. There's only three of them. Most of the stuff you've seen before, I won't go through it all. The big difference here is this is the first time I was using the ASI294MC with the Antlia dual band filter, but I wanted to go back and take a look at how these results with a one-shot color camera and this dual band filter compare with my experience using a mono camera and the SHO filters. Here's the filter specification that I pulled off the Antlia website. You can see we have an HA, an O3, and that's it. We have about a 5 nanometer bandwidth at the full width and half maximum for the filters, so that's all that you're letting through. My Pro filters that I use for my mono camera are 3 nanometer bandwidth, so they're even darker still. But with this combination of the filter, we should be getting exactly the data we need, particularly for HOO images. One of the main things that I was concerned about, given how dark the filter is, how little light is coming through that filter, and that I would be using that filter to also perform autofocus runs. And I wondered if that was going to cause difficulty in achieving good results with the autofocus with this filter. This is an example of one night's imaging, and you can see that we have the R squared values over here, which is basically a goodness of fit. It's how well do these points fall on the hyperbolic curve that is fit to those points. And this is the R squared values. All of them are above 0.99, which is pretty darn good. And when I take a look at all of the images that I took and all of the autofocus runs from those images, I get a very consistent set of results. First of all, there's nothing at all in here below 0.96. So all of these are very good fits. Every single run was a good fit. 80% of them fall in the greater than 99% range, just like this one night over here. This is kind of a typical night of imaging. And then occasionally I would get about 14% of the runs would fall down into the 0.98 to 0.99 range. But all in all, you can't complain about the quality of the focus that I've been getting with this filters, and I'm not having any issues even at 13, 18 millimeters. One of the first targets I took a stab at with this filter is M27. I've never shot this target before, and one thing that jumped out at me right off the bat was just how darn bright it is. This is just a 6-second exposure that's used for the plate solving routine to find the center of the image. Even with 6 seconds through this filter and with this target, there is still a pretty good signal coming through. And then I just used 200-second exposures throughout. I used 370 subs, and that gave me about 20.6 hours. So this is the least amount of time that I spent on the three targets that we'll talk about today. All in all, I think I'm pretty happy with the results. Now, from a processing standpoint, I've got to go back in and play around with the detail in here and do a better job of that. But from a color standpoint, this filter is doing a great job with this particular target. We're clearly getting the blue-green of the O3, and we're clearly getting the red. Even with this filter, I'm getting pretty good star color by using the spectral photometric color calibration process in PixInsight. This avoids the need to go back and pick up RGB colors for just the stars. That's what I typically do with my mono imaging. I will go back and spend at least 20 minutes on each RGB color just to get the star color and then superimpose those stars on the starless nebulosity image. All in all, I was pretty happy with this image, and since I've never shot it before, I was actually pretty impressed with how bright this target is. It's a great target. If you haven't tried this out, try it. I think it'd work in RGB as well. The HOO palette seems to work quite well with this particular target. The Crescent Nebula was the second target I took after, and this is actually a target I've shot many times before. I shot it with the ED-102, one of the first images I ever took when I got my mono system set up, and that then new ED-102 at 700 millimeters. I took it with the C925, the same telescope, but at the native focal length, so it fills up the field of view quite well. And as you can see, that image color-wise looks pretty much like the image you're seeing in the center of the screen with the focal reducer, but using the one-shot color camera and this dual band filter. And I've also shot this with the Red Cat 51 at 250 millimeters, but here I'm including a lot of the Satyr region, and I also included S2 up in the Satyr region, not so much centered around the Crescent Nebula, but in the broad field of view offered by the Red Cat 51, there is a lot of sulfur there, and I wanted to image this target considering that I had S2 to work with. But in all cases, the three little inset pictures were all taken with a mono setup. In the case of the 8102 and the C9.25, I was using the SHO filters from ZWO, and in the case of the Red Cat 51, I'm using the SHO filters from Antlia. I'm pretty happy with how this image turned out. As I say, I think it's a perfect match for this combination of one-shot color camera, an H alpha, and an O3 dual band filter. You're getting an HOO palette right out of the camera. One of the things about this that has nothing to do with the filter are the star shapes in the corner. There's lots of stars in this image, so it gives me a good opportunity to go back and take a look at the star shapes because I'm using the focal reducer. I'm using it at the required 105 millimeter back focus, but how's it actually working? This is the Celestron focal reducer that's supposedly 0.6 times focal reducer. Here I've used the PixInsight image aberration inspector. Let's start in the upper right-hand corner, which things are really bad. And you can see we have the telltale sign of stretched stars in the tangential direction. As we go down to the bottom, we also see those same stretched stars. And come around here, the stars are not so bad, but there's not a lot of stars to take a look at either in this particular quadrant. And then finally, in the upper left-hand corner, you can see we do have some weird features here, and that also seem to be aligned with the tangential directions. What this is telling me is that 105 millimeter back focus that I dialed in and that we're supposed to have with this particular optical device is not that accurate, at least not for my setup. I need to reduce the back focus to pull those stars in and try to make them as round as I can in the corners. The third and last target I have with this one-shot color camera and the dual band filter is the Tulip Nebula. This is the picture I took about a year ago with my ED102 using my mono camera and filters. Just after I had taken this picture of the tulip, I saw a video by Pat Prokop in his Heavenly Backyard Astronomy YouTube channel, and he was talking about this very target. But he brought up something interesting that I was not aware of at the time. He had done some research, and I think this is a good idea. When you take on a target, do some research around that target to see if there aren't some other interesting features aside from just the target itself. And he was explaining how there's a black hole located about right here, and that the gas expanding out from that black hole as it tries to eat up the star next to it is causing and colliding with existing more or less stationary gas in the field, creating a bow shock. And so you have this curved, very faint, but curved feature just up above the tulip. If you can include this feature in the framing, I think you definitely want to do it. Now, I happen to capture it in this particular picture, even though I wasn't trying. It seems like I'm getting a pretty decent oxygen signal out of it. One of the reasons I picked this target, I wanted to see if this one-shot color camera combined with the dual band filter could pick up this very faint feature. Here's the picture I got with the Tulip Nebula and my C9.25 with the focal reducer. In this case, I've got 527 subs at, again, about a 200-second exposure, gain of 122, and I'm coming in at around 29.3 hours of imaging time on this particular target. I did want to spend a little more time imaging this target because I was looking for that faint bow shock. It's actually much more difficult to see here, but if you follow that process of using the stars to walk your way over to the bow shock, you can see that we have the two bright stars here. Follow that line out. There's that bright star. And so right along this area here is the shock front created by this black hole down here. So that shock front is there. If you can't see it on your YouTube rendition of this video, it is very faint. It doesn't show up nearly as well as the one did that I got with my mono system and filters. Now, there is something else that came out of this that I thought was very interesting, and I don't know if it's real or not. I've looked a little bit online, but I can't find any reference to it. I see kind of a semicircular arc in the upper right-hand corner of this picture as well. Right in here, there is an arc. And it's actually pretty convincing arc because I've got a brighter arc here. There's a bit of a darker band going around that, and then a brighter arc on the outside. But if you guys happen to know what this is or have seen it before, I'd be interested in getting more information on that. If you're looking for this very faint feature, you probably need to stick with a mono system. And in my Bortle 8 skies, I'm just having a tough time of pulling such a faint feature out of the picture. There was something else that jumped out at me. I wonder if this little brighter arc here isn't another Easter egg. So let's zoom in on that area and take a look at that a little bit closer. The first thing that jumps out at you about this little zoomed in area is just how ugly the stars are. There's a lot of problems here with the stars. We're not going to worry about that so much, but we are seeing an artifact from the StarNet process of pulling out the stars that were there. I'm getting a weird blue here when these stars are superimposed on a bright nebulosity, as is the case here. So let's ignore the elephant in the room and instead let's look at this feature here. The reason this thing jumped out at me goes back to a video I put out on the Seagull Nebula some time back, where I had seen a similar feature here. And so I looked up this star, and sure enough, there was some literature about what's causing this, and it turns out it's another form of bow shock. It's like a boat moving through water. The boat is pushing the water out in front of it, and that's what's happening with this star. These stars are moving through the gas, and as a result, they have radiation coming off the star, and the stars are moving through the gas, and when that radiation collides with the more or less stationary gas in the interstellar medium here, where you get increased ionization right out here in front in an arc out in front of the star. There are actually two bow shocks in the Seagull Nebula. If you go back to the Seagull Nebula video, you'll see what paper it is I'm getting this from. This is a list that these authors have put together of stellar bow shock candidates. What I wanted to know was whether or not this star is producing a bow shock here, and that's what we're seeing there. So looking it up, sure enough, Hipparchus 98418 is in fact in the catalog, and it is in fact a bow shock coming off of the star moving through this gas here. So other than that little Easter egg out of this picture, this is one of my least favorite pictures of the three that I took with this filter and camera combination. I'm not getting as good a color out of the stars here, at least when they're superimposed on a bright nebulosity background. The second thing is I'm not getting that really faint Cygnus X1 bow shock that I can see much more clearly in my 8102 image with the mono camera and filters. Finally, I mean, it's just a bias and been using the mono system for such a long time. With the Tulip Nebula, I do prefer the SHO palette instead of the HOO palette for Nebula, where you have enough S2 to work with in order to create the SHO palette. A legitimate way to get the true SHO palette is to get a second dual band filter. You could just get an S2 filter and put that in, that's fine, but Antlia also has another dual band filter that I think might be interesting, and in fact I placed an order for one of these just to see what it would do. In this case they have S2 and the H beta lines also at 5 nanometers, you can see here. And now this will give you, in the red channel, you'll get the S2, and in the blue-green channel, you'll get the hydrogen beta. So this might be a good way to pair that and combine that with what I'm getting out of my current filter, the HA03 data, and then I can make a true SHO palette by taking the images from the S2 H beta filter, pulling out the red, that becomes the S2 or the red channel. Take the images I take with the O3 HA dual band filter, pull out the red from that set of images, and that becomes the green in the SHO palette. And then for the blue, you would take the blue and the green from the HA03 dual band filter and combine that with the blue and the green from the S2 H beta filter. I'm pretty impressed with the Antlia dual band filter paired with my one-shot color camera. I think it's every bit as good as shooting with a mono system and dedicated O3 and HA filters, as long as you're not looking for something that's extremely faint. I was concerned that I'd be doing the focusing through a dark filter, and I wondered if I'd be successful getting and maintaining focus through the night. It turns out that has not been a problem at all. I've gotten every focus run I've done has produced a high quality hyperbolic curve, so that has not been an issue at all. I have to say I'm pretty impressed with the star colors I'm getting out with this dual band filter and Insight spectrophotometric color calibration process. I'm getting very good protection against a bright moon and sky glow. Recently, just in the past couple of days, I've been using this filter and gone back to the native focal length with the SCT, but I've been imaging a target that is within about 60 degrees of the full moon, and I haven't noticed any effects on the image. So this filter does allow you to continue imaging when a full moon is up. Now, if you're like me and you prefer the SHO Hubble palette or those targets that have a lot of S2, you might try getting an S2 filter alone, or you get the other dual band filter that Antlia offers, the S2 and H beta dual band filter. Now, the last point, it has nothing to do with the dual band filter. It's just a comment on the Celestron focal reducer corrector that I'm using. And while I was careful to implement and set it up for the required back focus of 105 millimeters, I am getting very stretched stars kind of in a tangential direction around the periphery of the image. And that suggests that 105 millimeters is just too large. But I'll save that information for a later video where we can just focus on that particular topic. If you happen to be looking for a dual band filter for your one-shot color camera, be sure and consider the Antlia O3HA filter. Okay, guys, well, that's all I've got for now. We've got some clear skies coming up, and I'll be out doing some more imaging with this filter and with the new dual band filter that I should be getting here in a couple of days, and I'll check back in with you then. Take care.